Welcome to another episode of Unzip, Reboot, and Leave URL podcast. I am your host, Gautam Boshak. Today we have someone whom I know for last more than a decade now. He is a trade advisor, public relations consultant, India-Australia relationship expert. He was former president of India-Australia Business Council, and he is an author also. He wrote Soft Skills for a Flat World, which was published in India by Tata McGraw-Hill. And this gentleman is Stephen Manallack. How are you, man?
I'm doing very well, Gautam. Good to talk to you.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. Okay, so without wasting any time, because you are in that trade space and India-Australia relationship space for what, more than 2-3 decades now?
Yeah.
So you have seen a lot of evolution, you have seen a lot of shift, pluses, minuses, whatever. So we are not going too much back into it, but way forward. So how do you see India-Australia trade relationship evolving over the next decades, if you like?
Thanks, Gautam. I think Australia-India relations, both countries have enormous amount to offer each other. Trade has grown quite significantly, actually, since we finalised an interim trade agreement called the CECA, Closer Economic Cooperation Agreement, and we're waiting on a full free trade agreement, but those always take a bit of time. And as you know, the world of trade is always such a fluid thing that you work with what you've got. Interestingly, the CECA has led to significant growth in two-way trade between Australia and India already. And in my era of consulting on India-Australian relations, this is by far the best era for trade that I have ever seen. Previously, it just stagnated. Nothing was happening. Now it's expanding, and it's really across multiple sectors. I think we're seeing some of our agribusiness really get switched on to opportunities to develop trade with India. And we're also seeing several of our tech companies make great innovations and develop good partnerships in India. When you move from that to the education sector and see what's happening with our universities, and the fact that, we now have a university, an Australian university with bricks and mortar campus in India. So this is a massive change, and every other university is looking at the same opportunities. So I think it's an exciting time, and there's no better time for anyone in business or education. The best time is now. If you haven't been, get on a plane, go over there, start talking. Remember, India is a relationship business. We've talked about this kind of thing before. India is a relationship business. So you need to be there, Australian business leaders, Australian education leaders, in order to take advantage of the wonderful changes that are happening.
Nice. So on that, then definitely there are a lot of buzz, in India's expansion, foreign policies, and every now and then ministers are coming over.
Yeah.
So what are the key sectors, should Australian businesses focus on maximizing this, bilateral trade agreement and their benefits?
Yeah, I think you're spot on in terms of Indian ministers coming over here. They've been coming to Australia in record numbers. I think one of the messages they're bringing, and I'm not sure we're quite getting it yet, is India's very interested to receive more investment from Australia. And you know that Australia is the world's fourth largest wealth management company. So we've got a small population, but we've got a massive through our superannuation system and others, we've got a massive wealth management sector. So Macquarie Bank, for example, has been a leader in getting over there in the infrastructure area, and Australian Super has been a leader in getting over there. But I would say so many more players in the financial field in Australia need to consider forms of investment into India. And I think Australian family companies can look at this as well. The Bombay Stock Exchange has a lot of innovative ways that people can take advantage of India as a growth market. And so I think that's a starting point. Start with investment, because investment and trade are very often linked together. But I think in terms of the broader trade area, there are multiple opportunities. I'd say to people in the IT and in the innovation sector, India is a much bigger opportunity than many of you realise now. I'll give you one example. There's an Australian business called Findi, F-I-N-D-I, Findi. It now runs more automatic telling machines than any other company in India. Can you believe that? It's the biggest, and it's an Australian company. And the reason it's been so successful is that it's an innovator and it's found a niche. It provides automatic telling machine access for rural India. Now, as you know, the government of India is very keen on this. So that was politically a clever move, but it's also a clever move in terms of business, because India is fast tracking digitization of the economy, and becoming virtually a cashless society. This is such a radical transformation. And I think a lot more Australian financial and tech businesses could be over there getting opportunities from this. So in addition to that, I'm very keen on the agricultural sector, because Australia's got a great reputation among Indians. It's known as a clean and green producer. It's known as a healthy product maker. And so I think we can get more of that across there. The key is to find the right distribution channels. And I think we could benefit from getting more of the key leaders of the Indian retail industry. These are the buyers, after all. This is your distribution pathway. Get them over here and get them talking to our agribusiness. The Australia-India Chamber of Commerce has Reliance Retail's chief buying officer coming over later this month, early next month. And that's a great opportunity for Australian agri producers to get on the pathway to providing product into India. Australian wine is doing quite well in India, even though it also has quite a good wine industry of its own. And this is mainly led by young professionals in the big cities, including the tier 2 cities, which means that there are like over 100 of these. And the opportunities, again, it's a distribution issue. I'd like to see Australian wine industry consider setting up its own distribution approach into India, because India doesn't have a big established wine distribution provider sector. But that's a separate issue. On all of these things, I think companies would be wise to talk to the Austrade and talk to providers like that, because they're on the ground. They can provide the kind of inputs that we need. I think medical technology is a growing area too, Gautam. It's just ripe for immense collaboration. And also, we've collaborated in the past. And as you know, India is a massive provider of pharmaceuticals to Australia and to the broader West. But we're really good on some very sharp medical technology innovations in Australia. And I think the openings are there in the health sector in India. Health technology, you can only provide health services to such a big population by using technology. So I think that's another growth sector. Um, Australia's got a lot of expertise in retail, and Indian retail is growing super fast. So I think opportunities to collaborate exist there. So those are some of the sectors I think that are standouts, and it really depends on people getting over there, using support as much as you can, because you need support to get into India. Um, Even though it's a thriving economy, it's a growth economy, it's still not easy to get into India. And I recommend highly that people talk to Austrade. Every Australian state also has commissioners and an office over there in India, and these are outstanding people on the ground who can help you find your way into this very attractive market.
Yeah, and I will also put some of the links also in the details so that people can get use of it. Okay, so because when we came as an immigrant in this country, we also struggled in different ways for any immigrant, like anywhere in the world they do. So now when it comes to like Australian businesses looking for investment or expansion in India, the hurdles, okay, it's a relationship, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
but the hurdle is what? Like a regulatory hurdle or a cultural difference or market entry different or something else? Because I know you wrote a big blog about jugaad on India.
Yeah.
So what's your opinion on that?
So Jugaad is that wonderful Indian innovation where it really stands for frugal innovation. And even the biggest tech companies, even the biggest medical tech, pharmaceutical, space sector, defense sector, who are at the leadership of innovation in India and are succeeding so well, they still have this kind of frugal innovation background to the mind. Do you know India put uh, a spacecraft on the moon in the last year.
Mm-hmm.
The cost of that was less than it costs Hollywood to write to produce blockbuster films about space. So India actually landed a spacecraft on the moon for less than the cost of a blockbuster Hollywood movie. That's how clever the country is. And I think we need to switch on to that thinking. So you ask me, what do we need? What are some of the blockages and obstacles? India's made great steps forward in terms of ease of business.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's certainly very keen to open the door on collaboration and trade in areas like defence, manufacturing, space, um, aviation. All of these Australia has got some great players who can find a market in India. I think the biggest obstacle remains understanding the cultural difference, because we tend in Australia to think, well, because we're relaxed and we're a friendly culture, that everyone's going to like us and want to do business with us. The world doesn't work that way. Sadly, the world doesn't work that way. But as you and I have often talked about, India is such a friendly country that you can feel that you're doing well, but it may not lead to business. So I'd say to anyone contemplating going to India or even over there now who's not yet reached the level that they wanted to reach, it may be that there's some cultural understanding issues that are stopping your progress.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think some cross-cultural training, some cross-cultural expertise, adapting to each other's culture is so important. And for me, that's number one consideration in India. I think also we need to tailor our product or service offering to the Indian market. So, for example, some of the companies that are doing quite well in terms of um, taking products into India, if it's a packaged product, they might provide it in smaller packages. at less cost. This is a great market entry strategy. Online buying, by the way, is growing every month in India. Indians are so switched on, as you know, to technology. They're using it all the time, and they now are buying a lot of their produce, a lot of their supplies online. So adapting to the market's critically important. So I'd say get some cross-cultural knowledge, get some support from Austrade and those kind of organizations. Be willing to adapt your product to suit the market and look for opportunities to collaborate where you're not just selling into India, but you're actually binding yourself into the process in the future. I see collaboration as that can be the glue that binds Australia and India experts together so that in 20 years from now, they're still doing business because they've both got a vested interest in it. So those are some of my thoughts on how to enter the market. We know that India has a young population. This is often called the demographic dividend. So this is one of the reasons why Indian businesses have been able to grow so rapidly, because the market for their produce is domestic. Unlike China, which has had to rely on exporting materials around the world, India has got a big enough market itself that every product, every service, every innovation is really grabbed by the local market and finds a future there. So I think that's a factor for Australians wanting to go into India, to adapt and reflect that it's a young population. That means rapidly changing, but it also means rapidly adopting whatever is the latest thing. And you can't underestimate how exciting it is in India at the moment among the young people, because they're just embracing every opportunity to become part of a global marketplace while incredibly strongly retaining their Indian culture and Indian identity. I mean, you and I were over in India during one of the big festivals. We were in Kolkata together during the Holi festival. And, that's a time where Indians have great parties and they throw these kind of coloured powders at each other. And it's a sensational time. And you and I visited the Rabindranath Tagore Centre, the museum in India, and we looked out of the first floor of that building down to the courtyard that we later on had to walk through. And we could see that it was packed by university students throwing powder at each other. And we just knew we were going to get covered in that stuff. So we walked across that courtyard, almost got through, but then some charming and very polite young Indians said, "Do you mind if we throw some powder and share this Holi festival with you?" You can't say no to that.
No.
This is India. It's
Yeah.
the most exciting country on the planet. And so we came out of there covered. We're wiping this off as we went to our next appointment. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah,
But
clearly.
it was such a productive appointment because the guy was so impressed that we'd been participating in Holi. And you have to be ready for anything in India. That's the message, yeah? That's what you and I found. And Indian festivals are now stronger than ever. For example, we've just been through Diwali, which is one of the few festivals that really happens across the whole of India. Diwali is a great gift-giving time in India. Families give gifts, people give gifts to each other. It's really a wonderful occasion. And I'd say to any Australian agribusiness or retail business, if you've got a product that you can package up, if you think of Australian strawberries, you think, what's that got to do with Diwali? Well, if you could create a special pack that was just for Diwali of some of the biggest, juiciest Australian produce, you may well find that your market growth becomes stronger across the year. So we've experienced together that kind of festival frenzy in India. You know, the Ganesha festival is another wonderful one. So India is retaining its own way of being a culture, its own diversity, you know, over 25 major languages in India. It's hard to believe that, isn't it? But every district is different, the language is different, way of doing business is different. So there's a lot to adapt for, but there's 1.4 billion reasons, 1.4 billion people
Mm,
is the reason to be over there.
true, true. And the same question when Indians are coming here, like if when they want to expand here or start their own thing here, then
Okay, so there's some interesting things about Australia. And the one is that we do business quite conservatively here. I don't think we realize that.
I think we have to open up now. Time is already there, you know.
I think time is there. You're totally right on that.
This glass ceiling
We
has to go.
yeah, yeah. So, you know, again, it's important though for Indians coming here to do their research, do their homework. So when I say Australians need to go over to India many, many times, get to know the local market, get to build relationships. So Indian comings here need to do the same thing. And I think connecting with some of the key professional services firms that operate in both countries, that's a very good start. I think connecting with each state government has a trade and investment office in Australia. Talking to them is a good second step. Choosing where to set up if you're coming from India as a business, where would you set up your Australian subsidiary or business? You know, is it Sydney? Is it Melbourne? Is it Brisbane? You cannot automatically say where is the best place to be unless you do the homework and research it. And I think one of the things from an Indian perspective is the same as for an Australian perspective. Get to understand the cultural differences between us. And the biggest one is in how we communicate. India is known as an indirect communicating country. In other words, as we've talked about before, Indians don't like to say no if they can't do something. They'll find a polite answer like, I will try my best, or like this. And that's how they adapt. And Australians, on the other hand, from an Indian perspective, I'd say if you can be very aware that Australians are quite direct, Australians are quite transactional. So if you can adapt to that while staying true to your own culture, then you're going to do well here. That's the message. Australia, so while it has historically been conservative, I think it's more attractive now than ever before for Indians coming here. I talk particularly to accounting firms, but also legal firms here who are doing quite significant amount of investment, of quite a significant amount of business looking after Indian companies coming here. And of course, we've got increasing numbers of Indian tourists coming here, Gautam, you know. And I think that's partly because more and more Indian families have their children studying here. And so they come to see their children, then they see their extended family. And the Indian diaspora here is such a massive asset for Australia. You know, if you're a visiting Indian business person and you can connect with an Indian here in Melbourne or in Sydney, in Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, connect with an Indian who's part of the diaspora, who's been in Australia for multiple years, then you're going to get some very good advice and assistance by using that asset. The local Indian community here is very influential. is growing in its ability to influence things. And I think from a point of view of a business wanting to come to Australia, I'd be really trying hard to connect to local Indians in this community.
Mm,
What do you
mm.
think?
Oh yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
not only the ostrich, like there are few small but uh, like uh, like organizations who are doing consultings around this area. So sometimes they are giving like cultural reports, sometimes they are giving like a retail area-wise report. So there are small, pieces, things are happening which kind of definitely help you. You don't have to go to big consulting groups for that.
I think that's true. I think
Yeah.
that's true. So you can find the right level for what you're wanting to achieve.
Exactly, exactly. Now, a typical question which is asking everyone these days, how did Mr. Donald Trump's presidency and the subsequent shift in US foreign policies will influence India-Australia relation, if at all?
Ooh. I think this is the big one. And we're all in the same boat here because we're not sure what's going to happen in the next year or two. But there are some clear indicators. The first thing is um, Donald Trump, as the new president, is a close friend of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Those two have formed a very close bond. Um, they they both come to leadership in a sense as not being from the establishment themselves. You know, Modi and Trump both come as a record of being outsiders. Trump, an outsider in Washington, and Modi, although successful in Gujarat, an outsider in New Delhi. And so I think the two men have very much bonded. They're both strong men and strong leaders. And Indian business has historically been quite enthusiastic about President Trump, probably more so than Australian business. So I think for Australia, its links with India can become even closer in this era as we react to the Trump administration. So we know that Trump is not a big advocate of free trade. We know that he plans to impose tariffs across the board, and we know that the heaviest tariffs will be on China. To some extent, that will probably increase interest in Make in India. Modi's push to increase manufacturing in India could be well assisted by that Trump initiative. The other thing that's brought Australia and India together over the last, I think, 5 years has been what is called the Quad. The Quad is four countries:
Oh yeah.
USA, Japan, India, Australia. And while it's been around for a while, it's only in the last few years that it's become prominent. And the leaders of each country have been driving the Quad. So we don't yet know what President Trump's attitude will be to the Quad, but given that one of the highly contentious areas of the Quad is how to respond to China. That's really what brought the Quad close together. This is a message that potentially resonates well with the new President Trump. And so I think Australia could do well in talking to Modi, talking to India about how they can invigorate and continue to invigorate the Quad and encourage President Trump to embrace it as part of his future. So I think there needs to be a preparedness to adapt to change. You know, all change is bad at first, isn't it? but change can sometimes include benefits for countries like India and Australia. So we're going to have to be nimble. Our diplomats are going to have to be very vigorous. Our trade people will have to be very adaptable. And I think if the Prime Minister's relationship continues to be close to Modi and Modi's relationship continues to be close to Trump, then there can be benefits for us in this new era.
Right. Wow. Okay. Okay. So we are actually sitting in a much, much better position than compared to like last 2, 3 decades.
Potentially we are,
Potentially
but
we are.
but,
Yes.
but we're gazing into the future here,
Hmm.
and the future is just about the only thing we can't predict, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we are kind of end-ish to our conversation. And the last question, what I would like to ask you, because you are a communication expert and you wrote a book on soft skills for flat world, and you always pushed me and many other like me about communication, and I learned a lot from you. So because your book is what, more than a decade ago published in
Yeah,
India?
a decade. Yeah,
Yeah. So what are the new skills for this flat world at
yeah,
like in today's time?
yeah. Well, I think I always think of university students. They're the future, aren't they? And so the question I always think is, how can a university student be prepared for the future world? Or how can a young executive or professional be prepared? Someone who's on their career path, how can they be ready for what's happening? Well, the big thing that is going to continue to make us all need to adapt is that business will continue to be global. Even though there may be some push against that, it's almost unstoppable. And, Indian firms from the big Infosys, the big TCS, HCL, other technology giants, they know about this. They've been doing this for decades now and doing it well. And I think when you draw back from that to the individual, I'd say any opportunity any of us have, whether Indian Australian or Indian Australian or indeed American or whatever, any opportunity we have to work on to improve our presentation skills, whether it's one-on-one or to a group, I think any way we can improve that is going to be a big asset in the future, because you're not going to be just communicating with a young Australian or a young Indian. You're going to be communicating with young people from around the world. That's the reality. And so I'd adapt to that. So that's the first thing. I think presentation skills are going to be even more important. And that includes our ability to speak on Zoom or Teams or any other format, and our ability to respond to people from different cultures. Now, for example, when you think of talking to Americans, Americans are the masters of small talk. they they just do it. It's like they're trained from birth to do small talk, and that's how they build relationship. Australians, not so much. So we're all going to have to learn the art of small talk, and that gets back to being prepared to talk about your family, talk about your interests, even your hopes and dreams, talking about people you admire, talking about your work environment and what you're learning from it. These are all the kind of small topics that I would say we need to be ready on, so that when we're dealing with people from around the world, we can engage in the small talk that other countries, particularly America, but other countries in general, are more used to doing than Australia or India. I think those are some of the things that will prepare young people for the exciting world of the future. And I'd say to those young people, bring an optimistic mindset, because that shows, you know, if you feel that you have the resilience to bounce back from any adversity, to jump and take any opportunity, to feel optimistic about the future of the world, then I think people will inevitably like you and want to talk to you and want to do business with you. So I think this mindset is a key skill that we can all learn from as well. I hope that helps people because I think the young people are the future and they'll be shaping this world and they will do it well if they're prepared for it.
Mm. And I would like to add one more thing because I recently became a very big fan of Big Five personality.
Yeah,
And what I'm seeing is, in my perception, that openness trait you need more and more because everything is opening up. Everything you have to see from a like an open mindset
yeah,
from your closed whatever world you are coming from. If you see the whole, if you see things from that angle, you might lose many things.
yeah.
So I think openness trait is more and more important. So
I think that's a wonderful thought, Gautam, because it's like we used to talk about lifelong learning, but
mm,
it's really about openness, you know. And the great Mahatma Gandhi said, you know, we should live as if we were going to die tomorrow, but we should learn as if we're going to live forever. And and I think openness is the secret to that. If you find the world exciting, if you're open to change, you'll learn so much faster and you adapt so much faster. It's a good policy.
excellent. So on that, we should end our podcast here. So for our audience, as you know, if you want to recharge your energy, reboot the software, preconceived motion you have, and live life in your own terms, this is the right place for you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Gautam. Good to see you, my friend, and catch up soon.